Most people think that Monopoly is just a game with dice and plastic hotels, but it's actually one of the best ways to understand property investing. I'm an economist at Opes and own 6 properties, and I still play Monopoly like I'm trying to retire on it. And the more I work with real investors in the real world, the more I realize that it's actually one of the best tools for understanding how property investing really works, which is why in this video, you're going to learn the 5 lessons that property investors can learn playing Monopoly and the one major thing that Monopoly gets wrong. In Monopoly, you start at go, you roll the dice, and every time you get around the board, past go, you collect your salary, which is $200. And the way you get ahead is to use that money to buy some property, and then that property eventually earns you money. Now, imagine you collect your salary and you keep going around and around the board and you never buy anything. You pay rent, you get stung by chance cards, you buy snacks at the train station, and after 20 laps around the board, you've got nothing to show for it. Well, that's what it feels like when you're 45, halfway through your working life, and you're still living payday to payday. And I know that sounds harsh, but it's also the truth. You can't just be on the treadmill of life going round and round the board collecting your salary and spending it all. Instead, you want to have some assets that earn you money without having to pass go every single time. So how do you do that in life? Well, the best thing to do is to make investing a habit. You see, most personal finance books suggest saving somewhere between 10 to 20% of your pay each week, fortnight, or month, however often you get paid. So start by setting aside a portion of your money, ideally transferring it to a separate bank so you know what's investment money and what's spending money, because your salary is not the goal, it's your stepping stone. Back in the global financial crisis, there was a property guru called Dean Leftis, and he famously had $20 million of property with a truckload of debt. Now, a couple of years later, he went broke and declared bankruptcy, saying that some holes are just too deep to climb out of. Well, he probably should have played a little more Monopoly, because that is a classic mistake that rookie players make too. I mean, have you ever played someone who gets really lucky with their rolls? They land on a whole heap of properties and then they use their startup capital to buy as many properties as they can. And they start buying it up, they get some lucky rolls, they spend some more money, buy some more property, and then after a couple of rounds, yeah, sure, they own a lot of property, but they've spent almost all of their initial capital. And then when an unexpected bill comes in, like a speeding fine, they don't have the cash. And so they've got to mortgage all of their properties up to the hilt, and they find themselves in a cash hole that they can never recover from. Now, a lot of rookie property investors in the real world make this mistake too. They think that buying property is the same thing as winning. But in Monopoly, as in real life, you lose the moment you run out of cash. Just like buying no properties is a dumb way to play Monopoly and life, buying too much too quickly can be equally dumb. You don't want to take on too much debt, push your budget to the absolute limit just to grab every single last property. You always still need to have some cash left in the tank. Before you even roll the dice for the first time in Monopoly, you should ask yourself, what are the best properties to own on the board? Is it better to own a cheap property like Old Kent Road, or is it better to own a more expensive property like the Strand or even Mayfair? Well, if you play against kids, they'll often go for the most expensive properties like Mayfair. And the reason they think that is, well, if I put a hotel on Mayfair, then I'm going to get $2,000 whenever someone lands on it. But they're only looking at the rent and not what it costs to put the houses and hotel on that property. You see, the real question isn't how big's the rent, it's how fast does this property pay me back? You see, it's not just the rent that matters, it's the ratio between your return and the investment. And Towards Data Science ran 10 million Monopoly simulations to figure out which of these properties actually pay you back the fastest. And all of that number crunching showed that orange properties get landed on the most. So if you build 3 houses on one of these orange properties, you get paid back really fast compared to if you spent the same money buying Park Lane and maybe putting 1 house on it, because Park Lane isn't even in the 20 most landed on squares and so has a lower return on investment. But let's be honest, no one's running 10 million simulations at home to figure out which properties to buy in the real world. So how do you apply this concept when you're actually investing in property? Well, you need to figure out what the return on investment is. And previously, this was really difficult. So I spent a bunch of my own money and built a tool that you guys can use to run the numbers yourself. It's called Opes Plus, and I use this with my properties every single week. You put your properties in, and it gives you a breakdown of what that return on investment is in the real world. That way, you've got a single number to compare different properties against. Because if you're going to make the biggest purchase of your life, you don't want to guess. You want to run the numbers first. Now, I'm giving this away for free forever, so go use it. The link's down in the description. Now, early in the game, every single property is up for grabs, and so you only have to pay $60 for Old Kent Road or $140 for Pall Mall. Later in the game, all of these properties are sold, somebody owns them, so if you're negotiating, you often have to pay double to buy that last property you need from one of the other players. And whether you're playing against your cousin Stan, who's a Monopoly pro, or your little niece Natasha, they're always going to drive a really hard bargain. And that's how Monopoly works. The fewer properties that are still for sale, the more they're worth. And if we think about that in real life, the concept applies too. Properties tend to go up in value over time. So if you think about your age right now, and maybe you're 32, think about what properties cost today. Now think back 10 years ago when you were 22, how cheap were they back then? And the thing I always think about is how many times did you think about buying a property 10 years ago and how many times did you actually do it? Well, you're probably kicking yourself now because the median house price in New Zealand has gone up by $329,000 in just 10 years. Just like in Monopoly, when the game goes on, property prices become more expensive, that applies often in the real world too. Sometimes in Monopoly, one person gets really ahead. So let's say that this person owns a couple of color sets, maybe all of orange, and they've built some properties on them. And then let's say that they also own another color set, and we'll call it all of the reds, and they've also built a house on each of them. And in this situation, if you're playing against a player who's bought all of these properties, built all of these houses, you might think, well, they are absolutely sure to win. But there is one card that can absolutely destroy them, and it is the dreaded community chest card that says, make general repairs on all your properties. Pay $45 per house, $115 per hotel. And if you've just spent all of your money, or if this player has just spent all of their money building all of these houses, buying all of this property, they might not have the money left over to pay for those repairs. So what's a player to do in that situation? They start selling down all of their houses just to pay the bill. And you think that this person was climbing the ladder and then suddenly they're down a few rungs. And this is the reason why I tell investors that the way to win is by staying in the game. Now, how do we apply this to real life? Well, it's the same deal. It's not just maintenance that you might have to pay for your properties, but what if your hot water cylinder blows, or the tenants don't pay the rent this week, or your insurance costs just jump? All of that happens. And so you need to plan for when an unexpected chance card might turn up. Because if your plan only works when everything goes right, well, it's not a plan, it's a fantasy. And that's why I say to investors, set up a Landlord Lifeline. This is where you have 10K set aside per property that you own, maxing out at 50K. So let's say you've got one property, well, that's a 10K buffer. 3 properties, 30K buffer. 5, 6, 7 properties, all just still a 50K buffer to cover any of those unexpected costs. You don't need that in cash. Personally, I use a revolving credit, which is basically just a big overdraft linked to my property. I only dip into it when I need to. Otherwise, I don't pay interest. And that way, if I get stung by those unexpected general repairs, I don't have to sell down all my properties to pay for them. And while there are some genuine lessons you can learn from Monopoly, there's one important thing that it does get wrong. And it's important to understand that this game was originally created by Elizabeth Magie. That was back in 1903. And she created the Landlord's game, as she called it back then, as an educational tool, but not to teach property investing. Instead, it was to show the downsides of capitalism. And while the current version of Monopoly, it's not exactly the same as what Elizabeth actually created over 100 years ago, there is something that it still gets wrong. Because right now, the goal of Monopoly is to bankrupt everyone else, all of the other players. That's the game. That's how you win. But in real life, the goal isn't to crush your friends and make them worth nothing. It's to buy back your own time and live a good life. I mean, it doesn't actually matter if you have more or less money than someone else. What matters is if you have the financial freedom that you want, if you've got the freedom to stop working when you want, if that's what you care about, and for you to be able to live the life that you actually want. You don't need to beat everyone else. You just need to buy the right 2 or 3 properties that let you to never have to work again. That's how you win. And if you want to retire rich at 55 on your own terms, watch this next video where I show you exactly how to build that plan.